Krishna, Hare. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Balava Giribharadhari. Gopijana Balava Giribharadhari. Jishodhanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jishodhanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janabalaba Giribharadhari. Gopi Janabalaba Giribharadhari. Jishodhanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jishodhanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai. O Premanandi Hari Hari. Panchakalpadurvasya kripa sindhuvyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Hare Krishna. Govinda, 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 Govinda. So we're going to continue our reading. I was thinking this morning how another angle of vision to what we're reading is how to avoid responsibility in the name of spiritual life. How to escape reality when you're escaping to reality. Something like that. Like we chant Jai Radha Madhava, we're escaping reality. But then when we stop chanting reality again, we have to deal with it. And of course, then we hear Bhagavatam, we're escaping reality. So constantly hearing and chanting, we can't do it 24/7. We have to deal with reality of our varnas, our ashrams, and our preaching. So I was remembering when I was a devotee, previous to me becoming a devotee, I had a fear of entering the material world, especially the world of the 9-to-5 job. At least in those days, it was 9 to 5. And I was very adverse to that. It was actually something that was traumatizing for me to even imagine doing. And so when I became attracted to Krishna consciousness, then I thought, oh, this is good. I don't have to work. So, of course, later on, when I raised a family, we needed money. And of course, as a devotee, I worked very hard. Of course, I was happy to work for Krishna. But there was that mood that we're talking about, that sometimes we join with an idea of escaping some responsibility, either external or internal. So it's quite natural. And what's so interesting or funny is that the process of Krishna consciousness, in one sense, is escaping reality. That's the way we see it, or transcending the reality of this world. And Prabhupada would often chastise us if we were negligent materially. And it's interesting also, Nectar of Devotion. Rupa Goswami says we shouldn't be negligent in ordinary affairs. So there was there was a tendency for us as young devotees, there is a tendency for us as young devotees to think that negligence is transcendence, because I'm only concerned with the spiritual world, which is why I joke, you shouldn't chant japa while you're chanting. You say, why? Because I can't concentrate? No, because you go into ecstasy, then you crash. You'll be, tears will be flowing from your eyes, you won't be able to see, you'll be trembling and dizzy, and you'll want to roll on the ground. So better not drive and chant japa. So, but there was this mood, or there may still be this mood to some degree, we want to transcend. And we definitely we would definitely like not to, how come I can't speak? We would definitely like it if we didn't have to deal with the things that of this world we have to deal with. And add to that the things of the internal world that we'd rather not look at, because then if you look at it, you have to do something. If you don't look at it, you can pretend it's not there. So, and I think this is exacerbated by our misunderstanding of a devotee has all good qualities. So, well, if a devotee has all good qualities will develop. Why would I need to do anything other than just escape this world, transcend it? And in a sense, it's true, like we were saying, if you live in a cave, then why would you even need a relationship skill? Because you won't have any relation, you won't be relating to anybody. And if you can do your bhajan, hearing and chanting all day, then okay, you've fully escaped, you've reached the perfection. But Prabhupada didn't want us to do that. He wanted us to face the world. And if you're married, or when you get married, you really enter more closely. Or if you're taking care of family or you're working, you're really dealing with it in a very fundamental way. So we say, yeah, we should transcend it, transcend the influence of it, but you can't transcend responsibility. So, as you know, when Prabhupada came, his disciples were young. So he had to deal a lot of this escaping responsibility in the name of surrendering to Krishna. And that was quite a common theme. I just want to surrender more. And part of that process of surrender was to ask Prabhupada if they could give up certain responsibilities, in some cases, give up grihastha ashram, leadership positions. Yeah, basically those two. Responsibilities within the grihastha ashram, and give up those responsibilities or give it up completely, or give up responsibilities of service when it's difficult. So Prabhupada had to talk to us a lot about responsibility, because I think, like myself, I think many of us joined with the idea that now we'll have no responsibilities. I mean, we didn't have to work, just chant on the street all day, and our meals would show up and the rent would be paid, and we didn't know how it was going on. And if we had a hole in our sock, we'd get our $3 and go to the store and buy a new sock. So it was pretty, in that sense, irresponsible. And it was meant to facilitate our sadhana and our service, but it did make a lot of us more irresponsible than we already were. And I was, on a scale of 1 to 10 of irresponsibility, when I joined ISKCON, I was probably like around 7 and working my way up. Because then when I joined ISKCON, I dropped out of school. And so most of that 7 was just me going to school and getting good grades. So if you can identify with this, it's worth contemplating that Prabhupada really had to talk to us about being responsible, because we tended to be irresponsible quite a lot. And Prabhupada was a very meticulous person. He was very, if you cleaned his desk and you moved anything a half an inch, he would notice. Why did you move my pen? Why did you move my pen a 16th of an inch? I had it in the perfect place. Like that, meticulous, like everything in its place. Nothing happened in passion. Details didn't get by him. He noticed everything. So it was really sobering to see that, because we tended not to be so much like that. Of course, you can go the opposite and be obsessively organized or obsessively detail-oriented and drive everyone that gets within 100 miles of you crazy. So we're not talking about that. But Prabhupada definitely, oh, you know the story? I've told the story before. To a group of devotees were driving to the Los Angeles Rath Yatra or San Francisco Rath Yatra. No, it had to be San Francisco. There was no, anyway, they were driving to Rath Yatra, whatever one it was, and their car broke down and they missed it. And so they came late. Prabhupada asked, why you're late? And they said, oh, it was Maya, Prabhupada, our car broke down, or something like that. Yeah. It was Maya's fault our car broke down. You know, classic, like if anything goes wrong, blame it on Maya. And Prabhupada said, why are you blaming Maya for your negligence to take care of your car? Yeah, car broke down. You know, we're devotees. The car should run with no gas in it, right? I mean, after all, car is transcendental, right? It's spiritual. Right? Why should we have to change the oil? It's, you know, Krishna will maintain. It's right there. Krishna protects his devotees. He maintains them. That means he protects and maintains cars that run without oil. Yeah, I don't think so. So, you know, that was kind of the mood. I think that mood is in some people's hearts quite deep, and there are remnants of it still that we don't want to deal with what we have to deal with. And as I often say, that when you don't deal what you have to deal with, it always comes back to haunt you. So yeah, now you didn't change the oil. So now, you know, 50,000 miles later, you're getting a new engine coming to haunt you and cost you a lot of money. You know, those 10 oil changes at 5,000 miles would only cost you like $200. This new engine is costing you $2,000. So our life's a bit like that. When you neglect something, it catches up sooner or later. And so being responsible is very much a fundamental aspect of Krishna consciousness, at least fundamental to what Prabhupada taught us. So now you have to figure out how to balance that and transcend it. Like be transcendental, be absorbed in Krishna Lila, be absorbed in the philosophy. You know, we talk about philosophy, it's like we're not even on this planet anymore. This is all just, it's very, you know, it's in our mind. It's analysis. It's intellectualism. It's all in the world of thought, you know, which is a beautiful world. We like that world. And hearing stories, it takes you into that story. But there's got to be this connection with the reality that we're dealing with at the same time. So I know we see this commonly when someone's a new devotee and they're really getting into Krishna consciousness. It's quite common that they have difficulty continuing their normal life, especially their job. It was just natural. They say, I just want to be in the temple all day and do service. You know, I don't want to do anything else. Yeah. And so the answer is, yeah, you just have to wait like 70 years, you know, to get a spiritual body to be able to do that. As long, or maybe sooner, you can retire in 50 years or whatever, but as long as you have a material body, there are obligations. And from the things that Prabhupada said about it, you could see that he saw that it would be detrimental to our spiritual life to shirk material responsibility. It would actually make us better devotees and stronger. And just like Arjuna, you know, he didn't want to do his duty. So that, and one might think, yeah, that was good, you know, just renounce it, don't do it. But and in some cases, that's true. But when God tells you to do it, or when Prabhupada says to do it, you can't write it off as it's not important. So this is something Prabhupada wanted us to do. And when devotees gave up their responsibilities, Prabhupada wasn't happy, especially if it was a big responsibility, especially if Prabhupada was depending on them. So the higher they went up, the more Prabhupada depended on them, the more he was upset when they gave it up. And that also included responsibilities to follow 16 rounds, 4 principles. Yeah, Prabhupada took that seriously as a spiritual master, that I'm taking seriously my job to save you. You should take seriously your job to follow me so that I can save you. And we see Prabhupada said some heavy things about not following principles, which could be experienced as shaming, perhaps. But I think there's 2 aspects to Prabhupada's doing that. Sometimes we need it, as we've discussed before. Sometimes the guru needs to be heavy to get the message across. But I think we can also say Prabhupada was expressing his own emotions, that, you have promised, I have promised, I keep up my end of the deal, you haven't. This is not good, this is not right, this is not Krishna consciousness. So it's nice to think of it that way also, that when we take vows, that it's a big responsibility. And this is something that Prabhupada wanted us to learn to do as part of our process of maturing in spiritual life, and also maturing just as a human being, responsible human being. So I was just thinking this morning that although what we're reading is talking more about the emotional world, it also relates to anything that we are neglecting taking responsibility for in the name of chanting Hare Krishna. You could kind of do a funny skit, like, your wife has some problem and she's talking to you and telling you have to do this, and then you're Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, and you're just chanting while she's like, just chant, what's your problem? Everything will just be fine if you just chant. And yeah, sometimes everything is not so fine if you just chant, because if you're offending another Vaishnava by your chanting, it's definitely not going to work. So, you know what I'm saying. Okay, that was my introduction for today. I like to give introductions, especially because what we're reading, we're not reading directly Prabhupada's words now. So, I have to inculcate, it's awkward reading something. We've read so many things that were pages and pages of quotes from Prabhupada, and now we're not reading that. So I want to keep everything in focus. Okay. Were there any questions we didn't answer from last time? Does anybody know? No, we're good. Okay. So I'm going to do it the way we did it last. I'm going to do it like we did yesterday, and we used to do it. As questions come up and comments come up, I will read them or answer them. Okay. So we left off talking about how leadership, if we become leaders and we have a need, we feel we have a need, we feel we have a right or have a need to put others down or control others in the name of this is my dharma, it can be disastrous. Mm. And then we had been talking about how sometimes we interpret Shastric teachings and Prabhupada's teachings in a way that even though we're kind to others, we're hard on ourselves in a unhealthy way. Mm. And then we try to feel good about ourselves by doing things that are motivated by the desire to feel good about ourselves rather than motivated by the desire to do the service the way it should be done. The next statement is interesting. This seems like a paradox. Others may unconsciously use their spiritual brilliance to feed their narcissistic inflation and devalue others or treat them in manipulative ways. So you have this paradox here, right? Using your spiritual brilliance to feed your narcissistic inflation. How could you be narcissistic if you have spiritual brilliance? It's a good question. Go into an hour that can happen. Let's just say it can happen. That you may have narcissistic tendencies because the way you were raised, and it may not change after becoming a devotee. It's possible. And as we've been discussing, these things become more serious if you're in a leadership position because you could misuse it. And one of the things narcissistic people do is they devalue others. They put them down. So we as devotees are meant to be introspective. And so being introspective means if I have tendencies like these, to put others down, to criticize, disrespect, then I would begin to start asking myself questions like, why do I need to do this? What am I trying to get from this? Why am I doing this? What weakness is going on in me? Is this a reflection of something that's been going on in my life recently, or my poor chanting, lack of reading? We would always go internally. And even if something is wrong, or even if a devotee is doing something wrong, if we're become a bit obsessed about it and too much focused on it so that it starts to become an impediment in some way to our Krishna consciousness, the introspective devotee would catch himself or herself and realize, I'm going off here. Okay, what I see is wrong, but I've taken it too far and it's absorbing me too much. That tendency for self-reflection, to look at our motives, is extremely important. Because if we don't do that, it's so easy just to look at a person or situation and say, this is a problem, and this situation is why I have a problem. And I'm not saying in every case, it's not why you have a problem. But in some cases, you can do something about it by how you react. And in some cases, your initial reaction was such that it became a problem when it didn't have to be, or it wasn't a problem for everybody else. So this tendency for self-reflection, the way I see it within our movement, it's very strong on an intellectual level because we know we should be reflective and humble. But it's not always strong on a practical level. Like we're not always taking it to the level of actually admitting. It's like theoretically you could admit because it's just a philosophy. Yeah, we shouldn't. I know criticizing means I'm seeing others. That can get in your head as a philosophy, but you don't really understand how you're actually doing it yourself. You just understand it as an idea. That idea in itself is quite interesting because it's possible we could understand everything as an idea. and not be able to take advantage of it as a way to purify ourselves or to remove the obstacles, see the obstacle and remove it. So this is important. And I would say maybe go so far as to say knowledge can be dangerous if you don't process it right, because knowledge can be dangerous in the sense that you think you know something that you don't know. Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I got it, understand it. Yeah, I heard that lecture also, amazing lecture. And then your friend is looking at you and thinking, I don't, they don't say, they may not say this, but they're thinking, I don't think you understood it because I don't see it in your person, in your behavior, in your character, in what you're doing, what you're saying. I don't see that you've understood this, at least not much. So I'm sure you must have experienced some devotee. There's just some devotee says something or does something, or even a non-devotee, and like you just can't even think of it. You just don't even want to think about it. It's so upsetting. And if they just mention that devotee's name, it's like, you lose your appetite. You have that experience? Like, and then you tell me, oh, so-and-so, he just like gave this amazing lecture. You should watch it. And that so-and-so triggers something in you. And you're like, why would I ever want to see so-and-so give a lecture? That's your response. That's the last person I'd want to hear. If those kind of things happen to you, you have to, if you're, it happens to us. We really need to stop and look and say, what is going on? Why am I so, whatever I am towards this devotee, be it envious or prejudiced or biased or just dislike, resentful? What's going on within me? It's an interesting question, because it's too easy just to say, I'm like this because he is or she is like that. Like, simple. He said this, he does this, that's why I'm like that. Doesn't really answer the question. There's a million people in the world who do those things or worse that don't bother you. So why this one? What's going on? So this is what introspection is all about. And introspection can be a lifesaver from making offenses. Because as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, you're always turning your tendency for criticism or to make offense, you're always turning it back on yourself and asking, what's wrong with me that I'm doing this? Not what's wrong with them. Okay, we know what's wrong with them. He said something wrong in class, or he mistreated a devotee. All right. Objectively, everybody agrees. But what's wrong with me that I'm dwelling on it? Or what's wrong with me that I can't even look at their face without feeling disgust? Now, in some cases, maybe there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe what they did is actually disgusting. That's how you feel. So I don't want to say every time it may be your fault. They may have done something which warrants very strange feelings. But that's for you to decide, to at least reflect on it, ask yourself. So that's important. Otherwise, it's just dangerous to think you know something that you don't know. Because you know how they say you don't know what you don't know? Make a t-shirt, right? You don't know what you don't know. So when you don't know what you don't know, you can't do anything about it. That's the problem. So we should try to know what we don't know. Like, what's going on here? Why do I don't understand? Okay. Have you ever heard somebody say something and you just say, I don't understand why they said that, which is a polite way of saying, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, basically. Or it's kind of a way of saying, I don't understand how anyone who has their head screwed on properly could say such a thing. That's kind of the connotation. I can't understand what they're saying. Maybe we can also, and that could be true in some cases, that it could be ridiculous. But maybe we also need to think, well, maybe I need to learn to be able to understand people who I don't understand or agree with. Maybe there's something wrong with me that I said that. Do you realize that there are many things that today you don't believe that you will believe, or some things that you will believe in the future, or many things that you disagree with today in the future, when you're 50 years old, you'll agree with, you'll change. It's possible. So what I think has become obvious, I don't know if this is because of COVID, but one thing has become obvious to myself and a lot of devotees is that although we're devotees, we lack in certain areas, or many of us lack in certain areas, to be able to listen, to be able to understand, to be able to self-reflect, to be able to admit faults and like that. This is, I mean, everybody is challenged with this. And so even as devotees, we're challenged with this. And so I think the worst thing we could ever do is think, no, I'm a devotee. That's not a problem. Devotees don't have this problem. I don't have that problem. To say you don't have a problem that you have, it's dangerous. And I think a lot of us just feel that because we're devotees, we don't have these human condition problems, which is true if you're a transcendental devotee, and you're not human. But until then, obviously, we're under the influence of our past conditioning and the modes of nature. So I think this is where some devotees get sidetracked. They don't actually realize they have certain problems because they can't imagine that being on their level of Krishna consciousness, anybody would have those problems. It's so unfortunate. That means the process of Krishna consciousness as understood that way has hidden the problem from them. Isn't that interesting? This is all good for your book, Tanya. Yeah. And so the process which is supposed to help you become more introspective is helping you or causing you to become less introspective, because you can't imagine that a devotee would have such and such problems that you have, so you don't even notice that you have them, right? It's also interesting because when we read in the books, Prabhupada talks about a devotee, and then he describes how a devotee behaves. And right, well, I'm a devotee, and it's describing a devotee. So two things equal to each other, equal to the same thing. And so we might think, oh, that means every devotee is like that. So I'm like that, even though I'm not like that. I think I'm like that because I'm a devotee, and that's what devotees are like. Have you ever gone down that rabbit hole before? Devotee has certain qualities, so I'm a devotee. So, of course, the opposite is I'm not a devotee. I have all bad qualities. That's the other extreme. It's probably somewhere in the middle, isn't it? Between I'm not a devotee, I'm the stool of the universe, and I'm a devotee. I have all good qualities. The truth is somewhere in the middle. But introspection is meant to be realistic, not to minimize the good, but to be aware of what's not good. And then again, as we've spoken of often, not to be discouraged by what you find. You can also find that your spirit soul, that's pretty encouraging. Full of knowledge, full of bliss, right? That's pretty encouraging. You are light, you are love, you are eternal. You are consciousness. Get to like yourself. Get to know yourself. You'll like what you find. So that side is there also. When you're down in the dumps, thinking, oh, as of today's lecture, I've realized I have 1,008 bad qualities that I wasn't aware of. And so I'm just going to go to sleep and take some antidepressants. That's all I can do. No, then think, no, I'm spirit soul full of bliss. Prema is in my heart. It just has to be revived, awakened, uncovered. Depending, different philosophies. Some say awakened, some say revived. Some say uncovered. Covered, just take off the wrappers. Some say, no, it's a seed, it's got to grow, whatever it is. Okay, I have to talk about this. This is so interesting. Did we fall from Vaikuntha? Did we fall from Brahman? Is our relationship existing as a seed and it's never been fully manifest, or is fully manifest and now it's covered and we have to uncover it? These important questions you could spend lifetimes contemplating. And I was listening to a very intellectual talk this morning that had my mind on the verge of cracking, trying to understand it. Or maybe it did crack. And I was thinking, this conversation had gone to such an extreme of which I never heard Prabhupada discuss it that way. Yeah, I think you've probably seen discussions online and so forth, that they get kind of confusing, like Siddhantically at some point. You're like, you hear so many things, you can't even think straight anymore. Well, what did Prabhupada say about this? And in often cases, the answer is he didn't even talk about this detail of this topic. To him, a lot of this wasn't important. And that's why it's always important when you're trying to understand to not get so nuanced and subtle that you just get more confused the more you understand. And that Prabhupada definitely didn't do that. And Prabhupada always kept it simple. So is it a seed? Is it covered? Well, if it's a seed, that means you never had the relationship, which means you never were with Krishna, and now it's being awakened. But if it's covered, it means you had the relationship, it's just now covered, you have to uncover it, which means you were with Krishna. I'm getting a headache now, right? Did Prabhupada deal with that on that level? Okay, for those interested in philosophy and Siddhanta, these kinds of discussions are like, this is like their life and soul, their bread and butter of their lives. And I'm not putting that down, and I'm not putting down intellectualism. But sometimes, or most times, Prabhupada didn't go to that extent. And Prabhupada would be more like ultimately like, what does it matter? You're in the material world, get out of here. Like, what do all these details matter? So, it can strengthen us, but at some point it can kind of derail us or divert us or confuse us, cause doubts. So when you're analyzing, when you're looking at yourself, you're looking at philosophy, and don't take it to the point of exhaustion where you feel like, what's the use? I'll never understand this. And the more I understand, the more I try to understand, the more I don't understand. And then you go to Prabhupada's books and you read and you go, oh, that was simple. That was clear. I think Prabhupada was careful to keep it clear for us who might have the tendency to get into depths of understanding that are beyond our pay level and wouldn't help us. That's why it's very important. I always encourage you, read Prabhupada's books and hear his lectures, because then you really get the sense of Prabhupada, who he is, how he presented Krishna consciousness, how he didn't present it, what he was focused on, what was important. You always want to have that sense, because that way you won't get confused. I mean, you would get confused less, because you'd think, wait a minute, I never heard Prabhupada talk about this. Why is this discussion important? And the answer would be, it's probably not that important. It's maybe important for intellectuals who need to know everything, but it didn't seem important enough that Prabhupada got into it to the level that we may want to get into it. So we may need to get into it for our own purification for preaching, but sometimes it's just curiosity. It doesn't really matter. And sometimes Prabhupada would consider that a waste of time or energy. Sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. Okay. Hmm. 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 Sangha often becomes an arena where people play out their unresolved family issues. It's easy to project onto teachers or gurus, seeing them as parental figures and then trying to win their love or else rebelling against them. Sibling rivalry and competition with other Sangha members over who is the teacher's favorite is also common. And that's what my wife calls high school. She goes, that's so high school. Grow up. It's so high school. Meditation is also frequently used to avoid uncomfortable feelings and unresolved life situations. For those in denial about their personal feelings or wounds, meditation practice can reinforce a tendency toward coldness, disengagement, or interpersonal distance. Yeah. I think the devotees who like japa the most are probably the most introverted. I think the extroverts might have a hard time with japa. You extroverts, you need introversion. You have to balance yourself. You need to just sit down. Don't sit. You need to sit in your cave every day. There are a lot. They are at a loss when it comes to relating directly to their feelings or to expressing themselves personally in a transparent way. It can be quite threatening when those of us on the spiritual path have to face our woundedness or emotional dependency or primal need for love. You know, what he's saying is like, when you become a devotee, you kind of think, okay, now my human tendencies are over. They're not going to affect me, right? And then when you find them, it's scary. Like, oh my God, I'm still a human being. That's really depressing. I thought I was super Prabhu or super Prabhurini. And now I realize I'm just another person like everybody else, but I'm on the spiritual path and trying to be better. That's the shock. You know, you can put that in your book, Tanya. When the chapter will be called "When the Shock Hits." And what's the shock? I'm just like everybody else, but I have tilak and beads, so there's hope for me. I'm like everyone else, but there's hope. Yeah. And as you know, as you see in your own life, as we discuss, a lot of these problems, of course, are common. And for people who aren't on a spiritual path, they just deal with them in specific ways. Either they neglect them or they go into some kind of counseling or therapy or some group to deal with it. But when you add the spiritual element, what this article is saying, it can throw things off in a completely new way that people who aren't on a spiritual path wouldn't have to deal with. So it can complicate it. Okay. Huh. Mm. Can be quite threatening when those of us on a spiritual path have to face our woundedness or emotional dependency or primal need for love. I've often seen how attempts to be non-attached are used in the service of sealing people off from the human and emotional vulnerabilities. In effect, identifying oneself as a spiritual practitioner becomes used as a way of avoiding a depth of personal engagement with others that might stir up old wounds and longings for love. Well, it's also interesting, just as an observation, that the need for relationship, the need to give and experience love and all of that, it's a human tendency. And often when someone becomes a devotee, especially if they live in an ashram, or they misunderstand the philosophy, they try to live without that, thinking, I will give all my love to Krishna. But giving your love to Krishna doesn't mean avoiding people to give love to them because they're part and parcel of Krishna. So sometimes that happens. And then at a certain point, these staunchos, what we call staunchos, Prabhupada uses the word staunch, very strict. Stauncho, I don't think is a word. I think maybe it's an ISKCON word. Or maybe it's just my wife's word. I don't know. Staunch. He's a real stauncho. And then one day the stauncho wants to get married, which you would think is not indicative of a bona fide stauncho. Because a bona fide stauncho has a heart that doesn't get affected by anything. And now he's like, no, why do you want to get married? Well, I feel lonely in the ashram. I need somebody to talk to. Like all these feelings just come out, even in the most staunch of brahmacharis. India is a little different. It's a different culture. There's more value placed on the sadhu and lifelong brahmachari life. I'm not saying that they shut down in order to do it, but many people in the West, in order to do that, which is not so easy or natural, shut down that way. And then after shutting down for a while, then these needs come out. And everybody's shocked. Oh, I never thought he'd want to get married. He seems so independent or self-situated. So you can't, of course, you can show love without being in grihastha life, but you can't exist without showing love and experiencing love in relationships. That's part of devotional service. 6 loving exchanges. Why are they there? We need them. We need to give them and we need to receive them, both. Okay. It's painful to see someone maintaining a state of detachment when underneath they are starving for positive experiences of bonding and connection. Yeah. Question. How do we reconcile the ideal of non-attachment with the need for human attachment? If Buddhism is to fully take root in the Western psyche, in my view, it needs to become more savvy about the dynamics of the Western psyche, which is rather different from the Asian psyche. It's a very good point. Actually, what we see throughout history and what we're seeing in ISKCON, and the reason sometimes there's controversy, is that wherever we're attempting to spread Krishna consciousness, we have to understand the mentality and the culture of the people, because what works in one place could backfire in another place because people process things differently. I was doing a little study which interests me. You might think this is strange that it interests me, but I'm interested in fashion, not fashion like how to dress nicely, but what fashions were in history, especially about female fashion, because we know today female fashion is how much can you show without getting arrested, basically, especially when you dress up for something. So I was looking, at how people dress throughout history, and this is not an exhaustive study, obviously, because it's just a cursory study of going through the different forms of dress throughout history. And there was no time, none of the dresses that I saw, women showed their legs, anything, not even their ankles. That was just like normal. And Prabhupada describes in the Bhagavatam how in Kali Yuga, especially now, things have changed. In fact, men couldn't even go without a shirt before 1930. Did you know that? If a man would go without a shirt at the beach and before 1930, he would be arrested, or at least given a citation for indecent exposure. Hare Krishna. You go, that's so Victorian, whatever, but that's kind of the history of the world up till 19. So what I saw was during the 20s, America went wild. That was the first time women showed their ankles and shins. Before that, they didn't. All the dresses were long. And it was the 1930s that they got shorter. And then as you go, 1950s, 60s, it just gets shorter and shorter and shorter. So now if you go out and preach at the Sunday feast, all you ladies, indecent exposure, cover yourself. You know, they'll think, like, what planet is this guy from? You know, what kind of prude is he? You know, like, what's wrong with this guy? You know, he's got really disturbed. You know, is he like a sexual pervert? That's how people will think, right? Like, you know, and when, you know, they try to accuse women of indecently dressing and therefore disturbing men in such a way that the men, you know, it's all the woman's fault for doing that. All right, there's some ideas there, but you can't justify rape because of that woman had a tight t-shirt or something. But, you know, so that's society, that's the norm. And it's like, hello, get used to it. That's just how it is. And I just read an article today, interesting article. There's a multi-billionaire Mormon. I think he's worth $5 billion. That's 1 million times what? It's like if you had 5,000 bank accounts with $1 million in each one. Is that right? How many millions is 5 billion? 5,000, right? So you have 5,000 bank accounts, each with $1 million. That'd take a long time to spend that money, right? You need to buy, you know, at least 1,000 houses just to get warm, right? Yeah, well, buy 1,000 $5 million houses. That's a lot of houses, right? That's like you'd have to visit 3 houses a day if you want to visit every house in a year. So he left the Mormon church. He was obviously one of their big donors. He left the Mormon church. He was raised as a Mormon. He was a missionary kid because of their views on gay and lesbian rights. He just left it. Welcome to 2021 America. It's even affecting the Mormons. So adaptation, adjustment, understanding culture, people's minds. And the opposite is also true. You go into a very conservative culture. You can't just say, hey, what's the problem if women, you know, do this or do that? Yeah, if you want a pie in your face, yeah, that's the place to say it in a conservative culture. So we have to be sensitive to that, because you can be a very good devotee, very sincere, and you just say something that doesn't fit within that culture, even though you could justify it with Prabhupada's teachings. You'll get a pie in your face and a little note saying, please don't ever come back here again. It almost happened to me, actually. But I came back anyway. I was re-invited back. They didn't use a pie. In fact, I didn't even say it. Someone else said it for me. What I said got me in trouble. Be careful what you say. Someone else may quote you. Yeah. And, you know, you could say, well, in India, it's like this. Yeah, but in the West, we're different. We don't think like Indians. Just the other day, a devotee wrote me and said, well, I got a letter from this man and he wants to marry me. And, you know, 3 days later, she's contemplating, you know, the wedding date. Like, we don't do that in the West. It doesn't happen that fast. I mean, you know, you can fall in love in a second, and yeah, but generally, it's a different culture. You know, you find somebody, it seems right, and it's like, okay, it looks good on paper. Let's set the date. Exaggerating, but in some cases, it's like that. So it's a different mentality, you know, and the Western mentality is, it's come to the point now is like, well, why even marry him? You just live together, you know, that's easier. Easy in, easy out. What's the saying? Easy come, easy go. Yeah. So it's a very different mentality. And of course, from the Vedic perspective, the Indian mentality is better. But although it's better, it doesn't always work outside of India. So that doesn't make it better if it doesn't work, even though it is better. Does that make sense? Something can be better, but if it doesn't work, you know, this car is better. Like, Volvos are better, but the old Volvos didn't have air conditioning because in Sweden, you don't need air conditioning. And now I'm driving a Volvo in Las Vegas and it's like, 50 centigrade, it's like I need air conditioning. So Volvo's a great car, just not good in Las Vegas. Now they have air conditioning, something like that. So it's, this is a good mridanga, but you bring it to a humid place, it's not good anymore because it's too loose. Good mridanga, bad in the wrong place. Something like that. We need a larger perspective that can recognize and include different tracks of human development, which we might call growing up and waking up, healing, awakening, or becoming a genuine human person and going beyond the person altogether. We're not just humans learning to become devotees, but devotees waking up in human form, learning to become human. I will, oh, you want to hear something really human? This is like so human. I just saw a video yesterday, and I've seen this scene before. Prabhupada is talking. He said, had the dream, my Guru Maharaj told me to take sannyas. So he said, I went to Vrindavan, I was living alone, and I was thinking, did I make a mistake? Like there, Prabhupada, he left everything. He's got nothing. He took sannyas. He's living in a room by himself in Vrindavan, and he's thinking, did I make a mistake? Even Prabhupada, human. Isn't that interesting? He had doubts. Did I do the wrong thing? He had like 5 kids. He just left them. Like, I left my 5 kids, took sannyas, and all of a sudden, like, you ever have that experience? You wake up one day and go, what did I just do? Something like that kind of experience. Like, here I am. How did I end up here? And then he also related that after he took sannyas, you may have heard the story, he was gorged by a bull. And he was really hurt and shaken up. And he was thinking, like, I'm giving everything to Krishna. Like, what's going on here? Like, you can imagine a similar feeling. Like, here I am, knocked over. I'm alone, no one to take care of me. Like, what did I just do? Giving up everything like this. But then Prabhupada, he was speaking about the history, and he said, but Krishna protected me. Krishna will protect you. But in that moment, there was some doubt that, The other day, a devotee wrote me a letter, and she said that it looks like her parents are going to be separating. And it was really painful for her. And she said, how do we deal with this pain? And we always think of this verse in Bhagavad Gita, that the wise lament neither for the living or the dead. That verse is always hanging over our head whenever you are lamenting or disturbed. It's always Dhiras tatra namuyati. The dhira is never bewildered by the changes and the dualities, and the learned lament neither for the living or the dead. And so I couldn't tell her to not lament, because certainly if your mother or father dies, or if your mother or father divorce, it's natural you're going to be upset. So Prabhupada said even Arjuna was lamenting when he lost his son in the battle. So Arjuna is a pure devotee. And we told that story last week or the week before, how Prabhupada had heard that his sister was dying and a tear came to his eye. So these emotions they're just normal. So you don't have to beat yourself up for feeling the way you feel. But the important thing for us is, because we have Krishna consciousness, and it is a stabling force in a very unstable world, the question is not really, is it okay to feel this way? Should I not feel this way? Because in many cases, no matter what anybody says, you should or you shouldn't, it's okay, not okay, you will feel this way. You lose a loved one, you're going to feel distraught. If you don't feel distraught, probably you're either an Uttama Adhikari or crazy or completely out of touch with yourself, like one of those three. So then the real question comes as, well, now that I feel this way, which we can say is normal, natural, you will feel this way. How can I live my life in a way where it doesn't have a negative impact on my Krishna consciousness, on my normal functioning? That's the real thing. That's so if you say, well, I have Krishna conscious knowledge, but I'm still lamenting. So what does that mean? So it means that will be natural, at least until you're more advanced. But use your knowledge to be steady now. Even though this happened, take shelter in the process and remain steady. That's where you want to put your focus. Because if you put your focus on not feeling something that you're feeling, that has to evolve organically to not feel that way. Sometimes by knowledge, you may change how you feel. Sometimes you won't, because the relationship that you lost may be so devastating that knowledge is not going to be enough. But so the real test of your Krishna consciousness is how you can remain fixed in devotional service, even in spite of all those feelings. And you will be able to deal with those feelings over time, naturally, through your spiritual strength. But if you give up on your sadhana and service, it's going to be much harder to deal with because you won't have that stability anymore. And then the tendency will be to give into the lamentation. Does that make sense? So I think that's important to understand, because a lot of times, we will feel something which we know is actually, I shouldn't feel this way. This is wrong. Okay, that may be true, but you are feeling this way right now. So you have to deal with the fact that you are feeling this way. And you have to deal with it in a way that will not in any way divert you or degrade you. Right? Correct? Okay. We have a comment by Gabriela. It is very common for people with symptoms of stress, anxiety, and anguish to come to psychotherapy, to whom their doctors or family members suggested that they do yoga or meditation to calm down or de-stress, instead of learning to listen, know, express, and accept emotions and review the internal world, which can also obviously be compatible with meditation for self-care. Unfortunately, it is part of the same society and culture that normalizes avoiding emotions as if they were something annoying or uncomfortable. Yeah. Of course, the way we view the world and the level of purification, the level of Krishna consciousness we're on, is going to affect how we are affected by what's going on around us. That I can't undermine that. But the fact is, we all are where we are. And so if Tanya's feeling something and I say, you shouldn't feel that, it doesn't necessarily help her, because that's how she feels. So she may need to know, how can I go on in my Krishna consciousness, even though I'm feeling this way right now? And really, in those difficult times, that's when we need most to take shelter of Krishna and not run away from Krishna, but go forward towards him. And, just think of the word. Think of Arjuna fighting in the battle after his son was killed, still going ahead, somehow or other doing his duty. And also these stories that Prabhupada was telling about, then the next story Prabhupada told was his typewriter and his tape recorder were stolen. I think also his manuscripts. This was the early days in New York. And, he was saying how discouraged he was by that. And he said at that time, he may have many times gone to the dock to check out the next boat. I'm not sure. But at least in this story, he was saying at that time, I would go to the docks, like, this is too hard. So he was saying how difficult it was. So we can't think that it wasn't difficult for Prabhupada. If we do, it kind of minimizes his greatness. So he's transcendental Paramhansa. But look what he's dealing with. It's just that what we see is that Prabhupada somehow or other was never diverted by the difficulty. Even the feeling, he's going to the boat dock. And the person at the dock told him, he said, you always come here, but I know you'll never go on the boat. And Prabhupada said, yeah, probably I won't, but I'm just checking. It was kind of like self-soothing, some comfort, to know that there's a boat there. I could always jump on it, worst comes to worst. So he was experiencing a lot of discouragement, at least experiencing difficulty. But as we see, he didn't give up. So when I was watching this, I was thinking, there was a Prabhupada's voice, and there was a picture of Prabhupada. I think it may have been a painting, but it's a picture of Prabhupada at the dock, the boat dock. Now, in Prabhupada saying I was discouraged, I was thinking, checking the boat schedule, which is another way he could have said I was thinking about going back to Vrindavan. And so when he was speaking, that's how I was taking it. Prabhupada is thinking. I'm this was going through my mind. One way of looking at this is Prabhupada is thinking, what's the use? Nothing's happening. This is difficult. I'm suffering. I want to go back. So when I was looking at that picture and thinking that way, something came over me very heavy. And I was thinking, what if that actually happened? Like at that point, Prabhupada gave up and went back. And that was it. He gave up on preaching in the West, just as his godbrothers before him had given up preaching in the West because they didn't think it was possible. So what if that would have happened? What if Prabhupada did not have the determination and the tolerance to deal with all the obstacles, and he just gave up? And it was like a shock hit me. Like where would we all be? Where would I be? What would I be doing? We may say there's so many problems in ISKCON. The better ISKCON with problems than no ISKCON. So I think this is important because a lot of times when we look at Prabhupada, we tend to deify him as someone who is so transcendental that there's no challenge in their life. And that would, if we deify him in that way, we won't get the full inspiration that comes from understanding that this was difficult for him. If you listen to those recordings, he says it was very difficult. He talks about his trip on the Jaladuta. He said, I thought, if I have one more heart attack, I will die. It's just difficulty starting from the beginning. The way he's saying it it happened in the past, so you don't feel let's say the urgency or the presence of the danger because he's alive. And so he's saying it that way, and it if you're not careful when you hear it, it can tend to minimize the severity of the situation. But basically, when someone says, I thought I was going to die, it's pretty heavy. He said, I was afraid I would die. So there's fear. Afraid, not afraid. Afraid I would die, but not afraid because he knows Krishna's taking care of him. But still, these things are these are the things that Prabhupada faced. And because of his devotion and his Krishna consciousness, he just kept going no matter what. So that's how you deal with the emotion. Always think, okay, this is how I'm feeling. Not necessarily should I always try to feel differently, but maybe I need to think if I understand that these feelings, I can't just erase them. What happened was so traumatic, I can't just erase it. But how can I go on now steadily? And the answer to that may vary for different devotees, but that's the question. That's the goal. Okay. We're not just humans learning to become devotees, but also devotees waking up in human form, learning to become fully human. And these two tracks of development can mutually enrich each other. While the fruition of devotional service is awakening or love of Krishna, the fruition of becoming a fully developed person is the capacity to engage in I, thou relatedness with others. This means risking being fully open and transparent with others while appreciating and taking an interest in what they are expressing and how they are different from oneself. So if you become more self-aware, you'll start to realize many things about yourself and many things about your communication with others, your interaction with others, your ability to be empathetic or lack thereof. You will learn more about these things if you take the time to look at it. And as we were discussing before, the reason that many of us never took the time to look at these things is because we thought, well, here I have Prabhupada's books. I understand Prabhupada's books. Everything is clear. I'm right. And everything's good. So if I'm right, I can't be wrong. And if everything's good, then everything is not bad. And then things that we are not doing well, or qualities which are necessary for improved human relationships may never manifest because we don't even think about them or think we need them or notice them or know what they are. So that's what's being referred to here. Risking, this means we won't risk being open and transparent with others. And we won't take an interest in what they're experiencing and how they're different and appreciating the differences. Yeah. In short, Krishna consciousness can be used as a way to deny our human side. As one Western Zen teacher profiled in the New York Times told of being advised by one of his teachers, what you need to do is put aside all human feelings. When entering psychotherapy decades later, he recognized this had not been helpful advice. It had taken him decades to realize this. But if we hold a perspective that includes the two developmental tracks, then we will not use the absolute truth to belittle relative truth. Instead of the either or logic, your feelings are empty, just let them go. We could take a both and approach. Feelings are empty, and sometimes we need to pay close attention to them. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. We have a question from Lady Tanya. I'm just going to call you Lord Chaitanya, but can we call you Lady Tanya? Yeah. What does Tanya mean in Sanskrit? You don't know? We will find out if it's a Sanskrit word. Doesn't seem to be. No. It may be, but not on the database. Okay. So we have a question. Would it be correct to say that the decisions and choices we make during adversities are more important for our Krishna consciousness than the momentary emotional reactions to those? Yeah, I would say that. To those adversities. Yeah. I think that sums up what I was saying. You know, I've explained before a principle. You remember I would talk about how your emotional reactions will depend on your consciousness, your attitudes, your beliefs, and so forth. And so as you work to gain more knowledge, you work on yourself to understand your own beliefs better and how your mind works. And you just work on yourself to be more tolerant, more forgiving, etc., more controlled emotionally. When you're in a situation that may have upset you in the past, it may not upset you in the present because you're a different person now. You've grown. You're more emotionally mature, whatever. And in that context of that discussion, what I was saying is that when you're in that situation and you're triggered by something and you become upset, the question is, what do I do about that upset? And or people ask, how do you not become upset? And I always say, well, it's too late. You already are. So that's why I think it's important to discuss both how you can not be upset, which is usually how we discuss it, or how you could react and not be upset, which is normally how we discuss it, which is, of course, valid. It's part of the philosophy and understanding of Krishna consciousness, but also we have to discuss how do you deal with it when you are upset, because you already are. And you will be for some time, maybe only for a minute, maybe for a day, maybe for your whole life. So how do you deal with that upset now that it's already there, rather than just say, well, I shouldn't be upset, so I'm not going to be, or pretend that I'm not upset and I'm over it when I'm not. We want to deal with it, both, as I said, through duty, but also seeing how we can eventually, work through it and purify it, overcome it, let it go, heal it, whatever is necessary. So I think it's sometimes confusing for devotees. You shouldn't feel that way, Tanya. Yeah, all right. Well, that, it's like, Tanya, I'm so hungry. You shouldn't feel hungry. You just had breakfast 2 hours ago. But I'm so hungry. Just stop feeling hungry. Get over your hunger. It's something like that. I'm trying to get over it, but I'm starving. Okay, maybe you have to eat something again. Let's deal with it in a way that you can move through it. So sometimes denying it could be a form of tolerance, not denying it per se, but tolerating it. And sometimes you have to feed it, but you can't ignore it because you just become more hungry. The more you ignore it, the hungrier you become. So it's something like that. So, it depends on the individual and this individual situation, how you're going to process all of this. But so there are different ways of doing it, and dealing with the reality that you're upset and trying to understand how to continue steadily in your devotional service. It's just very practical reality. You can go out on book distribution and get very upset. People could really mistreat you and you get very upset. So now, okay, how do I go on with this upset? Should I pretend I'm not upset and go scream at somebody? Then 5 minutes later, that doesn't help. Sometimes you're talking to someone, they're getting angry, and you say, why are you getting so angry? We're just trying to talk. I'm not angry, like that, So sometimes we're like that, like, you're not angry and you're screaming at me. Like, But that doesn't help to deny it. Stop telling me I'm angry. I'm not angry. You get it? You know. So how out of touch can one be? Pretty out of touch. Have you ever done that before? I'm not. Well, if you're not angry, why is there smoke coming out of your ears and fire out of your eyes? I don't understand. The steadiness, it also relates to what we were saying earlier about responsibility. It's an aspect of responsibility. So Prabhupada wanted us to be steady even when there were the difficulties, even when we may be feeling in certain ways that make it difficult to be steady. But that action of steadiness can steady the mind. So if the mind's unsteady and then you allow yourself to become unsteady, then you don't have anything steady left in you, right? And that's also why we say don't commit to something you can't maintain, because it'll create unsteadiness. So being steady is important. Chant 4, then build up to 6, 8. If you need to do that, follow 3 principles, 3.5, 3.76, So you can try to jump to 4 principles and end up like following 1 a year later. Of course, we encourage everyone to follow all the principles, but at the same time, for some devotees, that may be too much too fast. Or if you're going to follow them all, you have to have good sadhana, good japa. You have to have supporting activities that will maintain them. So anytime you take a vow, you'll need some supporting activity to maintain. You can't just take a vow and think you're just going to follow it, unless you're going to have actions that support it. So, no questions today. We can all take a rest for 5 minutes before japa. Hare Krishna. Jai Prabhupada. Gaura.